I'm Michael Shawn, and welcome to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Roger Dykes is a teacher and counselor with a master's degree in family counseling from Texas Tech University. He is the owner of UV Blake Records and has written a book titled Non-Persons Rolling in a Normal World. And there's a few more things. Roger was born with cerebral palsy. Now a quadriplegic, he has been confined most of his life to a wheelchair. And for a while, even enjoying a career as a stand-up or sit-down comedian and after-dinner speaker. Disabled? Yes, but you forget about that pretty quickly because Roger thrives. So here is Roger Dykes. 111 123. Okay. Let me see if my reverb works here. One. Oh, it does. Do you want a little reverb? Would you count to 10 for me?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
No, because that would just put reverb on me and not on you, and I'm not going to do that.
Okay. I don't have fancy equipment over here.
Are you drinking beer?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I bet that's good.
I always get sauced before a show. I do my best work when I'm sauced.
You showbiz types. Man.
Yes. But we also die young.
And we're still waiting. Sir?
I'm ready anytime.
You can take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Michael, for bringing your podcast friends and everyone in, and I hope we have a great show. I know we will with you here because you always have such fascinating questions to ask.
I like it when you start out every podcast by just paying me compliments after compliments, because for our listeners out there, I want you to know that I've known Roger for years, and that hardly ever happens. That's a thing when he gets showbiz in him and he gets started on a podcast, then he does stuff like that.
It's called acting.
Following up on an issue that came up on your last podcast. After the podcast, you said, if you want to ask me that again, you can, because what happened is we were reading from your emails. We were reading some questions people are asking, and they ask about your love life. And you just kind of got quiet. And so I ask you the question again. So, Roger, tell us about your love life. And you still just stayed quiet.
Well, it hasn't always been the most pleasant part of my life, you understand? So I sometimes hesitate to bring up this kind of material because it hasn't always worked out well. I'm
sorry to hear that.
I was even more sorry about it than you were because it never worked out. No, I tried to have a love life. I mean, I think it's a great idea. I did the best I could. Well, for example, the first date I had was a blind date. Didn't work out. She kept running me into walls. Got through that. Called up another girl.
This one, but your second girl, you learned your lesson.
The second girl,
a blind girl for that.
We didn't do a blind date anymore.
Yeah.
This one had all of her faculties, except she stood me up, and I fell over. And she stood me up.
Oh my!
And I fell over, and it was that night I learned how painful romance can be.
Oh, Roger.
But, I was not deterred, though.
Surely you didn't stop there.
Oh, absolutely not. No, I decided I would do it scientifically.
Well, that makes sense. I would expect a well-educated, master-degreed individual like you, published author, you would take the scientific route.
Absolutely. So I called up harmony.com.
Oh.
And I filled out their form.
Hey, all right.
I'm figuring that's got to work.
Yeah.
And so
scientific.
I filled out the form, filled out every question. Then I added an attachment to the bottom of it just to be sure I got everything covered. I used that to describe the wheelchair. And I think I over-described because I ended up being perfectly matched with a Volkswagen Rabbit.
Oh, Roger. Oh, my.
Yeah, so that didn't work out too swiftly either. But eventually, because I'm persistent,
you came back and tried again.
I tried one more time.
All right. A love life is worth that, Roger.
It's worth it, so I'm told.
Yeah.
Anyway, I found the perfect girl. She was willing to go out with me. We had a great time. We went to the theater.
Oh, that's wonderful.
She wanted to sit in the back where we could make out. I told her, great. She sat in the back. I sat on the front row because you remember the movie theater floors are sloped. And so she had a great time in the back with somebody. And I ended up with the main actor's foot in my face most of the night.
Roger.
But we didn't finish there, because when we got out of the car, she asked me that question that every young man wants to hear.
Oh, things are heating up now, Roger.
Yeah, they are, because she said, would you like to go park? And I went, uh-huh.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So we found this lonely stretch of road with only 40 other cars there, and we parked. And I mean, it was a perfect night. It was absolutely perfect. There was a nice breeze blowing. You could see the stars. Turned the radio on, had a little romantic music. I mean, it was great.
Oh, man, you are killer. The killer, man.
Oh, yeah, and it was great. And so as the evening wore on and I got a little more brave, and she was seemingly warming up to the idea, I put my arm around.
How could she not be warming up to you, Roger? Right. A guy doing all this, man?
And I put my arm around her neck.
Oh.
Uh-huh. And had a muscle spasm and had her in a headlock for about 30 minutes. She will still date me, but in order to date me, we must double with a referee from the National Wrestling Alliance.
So it's a threesome.
So, yeah. So now you know why I don't discuss my love life very often.
Roger, that headlock thing, a guy could get famous for that, you know.
That's true. Oh, I was. That's why nobody else would ever date me.
So there was an answer to how's your love life, but you just couldn't bring yourself to go through all of that. But in thinking about it, you were able to do that.
It's very challenging, yes.
You know, the thing about it, when they listen to this podcast, Roger Dykes Just Sayin, man, people, they never know. They never did. You have lived quite a life. I've got 2 or 3 other questions here. Let me just run these out to you right quick.
All right.
This comes from a person that is been listening to the podcast. He says, I need your advice. I have been in a wheelchair for a couple of years and anticipate being in one. He's talking about a wheelchair for the foreseeable future. I'm in this situation due to a fall while rock climbing. Roger, do you ever go rock climbing?
I gave that up many years ago.
That wasn't the question. I just threw that in.
Oh, okay. Well, in answer to your question, I gave up rock climbing many years ago. It's too hard to drag the wheelchair behind me.
He says the pandemic has lasted so very long. TV and audio books have done what they can. He says, I enjoy listening to your podcast every 3 weeks. What advice can you give me about other podcasts that you might recommend and other activities that can occur to occupy my mind in a positive way, as physically I remain somewhat limited? That's a fair question. You'd be a good guy to ask that. And you're a sports guy. You get into sports. Of course, that's been a little curtailed.
Well, I'm going to say, with the pandemic, forget that. There is no sports. They're calling it sports, but it's really not, because it's only half being played, and we don't even know, for example, in football, whether there will be any football this year or not. And the way they're doing football nowadays, with all of the political correctness, I'm not sure that I care whether they have it or not. Yeah. But nonetheless, sports, yes. I mean, I watch when sports are on. I watch a lot of sports, and But I guess maybe one of the major things, I'm also involved in church work and in Bible class study, Bible study, and things like that. That pretty well summarizes what I do. But there is one thing that I would mention, and that is that there is one podcast besides mine.
Oh my!
That I would recommend.
Well, that's pretty open-minded of you to say something. There's a podcast besides yours.
Well, of course, there are many podcasts, but there's only one that I'll listen to regularly, other than my own. And that's Free Range Texan. Have you ever heard of it?
I think that's an important thing that you just brought up, and I was about to remind you if you didn't think of it.
Yeah, well, I thought of it immediately because my month kind of centered around that day.
So that's Free Range Texan.
Yes, sir, it is, and it comes out the first day of each month.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a podcast variety show, if you will. Got a host, and then he introduces different people and acts and whatever.
Those podcast guys, they got to stay employed somehow.
Very well. I understand it. I understand that he's gotten wealthy off of it, but that's why I got into the business.
Oh, you're killing me, Roger.
I heard about his success.
Hey, let me give you the next question here. I have a teenage son who, like you, has cerebral palsy. His peers at school have not treated him well. He remains the butt of jokes, and they are not above playing practical jokes at his expense. How do you, Roger, deal with what may have been similar situations when you were young, and how do we, his parents, support him? It's a good question.
Well, in my case, I determined that rather than be angry about it, which would serve no purpose, I would try to remember the lines they used and incorporate them into my jokes, which later I made money off their insults. So I thought that was a just reward for their activity. The practical joke thing, the practical jokes are a little more serious, because the bad part about a practical joke is it can turn harmful without the person realizing they're creating any harm. Yeah. In other words, I do a practical joke on you, and you're a normal person, you can handle it, no problem. The handicapped person is much more vulnerable, so I'm less accepting of practical jokes than I am verbal jokes and things like that. But basically, I decided I would just accept it as part of reality and try to joke back with them. But basically, just if you can, accept it, enjoy it if you can, because you're not going to change it overnight. But I think it's good to joke and kid with handicapped people. I don't think that you should ignore them or be so afraid you're going to say the wrong thing that you don't talk to them at all. So I'm all for people communicating with the disabled, and the disabled have to accept the kind of communication they get.
Yeah, good answer, Roger. Here's another one. Roger, we heard that you have a master's in family counseling from Texas Tech and have spent time counseling families through your career. So they've got a simple question here, Roger. They say, what were some of the hardest things you faced while being a family counselor?
Lack of income. No, we dealt with, I've dealt with all sorts of issues and things, and I don't know that there was any one that was, I guess probably the hardest thing we deal with is when parents come and are upset because their teenage child has gone off the rails.
Yeah.
And when you check the history, you find out they didn't have many rails for the child growing up, and so it wasn't that hard to get off the rails. And they're suddenly shocked that their lack of discipline, their lack of directness, lack of control was now being manifest by this teenager, and they're going, how did this happen? And when you check back to the history, you say, well, you don't necessarily tell them this, but you look at it and say, well, the reason they're having the problem they're having now is because they never corrected it back when the child was younger than they could have.
You don't look very far before you find it. It sounds
Right.
to me like often. Yeah. Well, that's a good answer for that. And, and you would expect a lot of times for the question to be, what were some of the more humorous things that you faced? But they didn't say that. They said, what were some of the hardest things that you faced? And that's a good answer for that. Roger, we have, we want to thank our listeners. They do a great job of bringing in thoughts and questions, and some of them are a little provocative. And we thank you for talking to us about some of that stuff. We have in the past, Roger, you have given your opinion, and your opinion is well thought out always, and it's because of vast experience in some areas that you have. And so we're going to mention the government now, currently providing the necessary and appreciated funds for caregiver services and medical services via Medicare and Medicaid. Most people pretty much nowadays, most taxpayers take for granted, so to speak, that those types of programs are going to be in place. And I think the average taxpayer goes to bed at night and goes, well, that's something good that the government does. And we don't send those funds overseas. We help the people in our communities that make our communities a better place. But having said that, Roger, there's a big however in this. However, there are certain financial restrictions connected with the Social Security Administration, which adversely affect those on the program, like you, Roger. Currently, there are 2 financial ceilings that are, at this point, have grown to be quite frustrating. First, one's monthly income cannot exceed $803. And second, and I would ask people, how many of you tried to live on $803 and still provide the things that a person in your condition needs? The second is, of course, one's total assets, including one's house, and one vehicle cannot exceed $2,000. Now, let me ask you about that, Roger. When we say cannot exceed for your vehicle and your house cannot exceed $2,000, that's monthly. Is that correct?
Well, no, actually, the way the law works, how I'm allowed to have a house and one vehicle, and then the $2,000 starts. But the problem being that the upkeep on either a house, monthly upkeep on either a house or a vehicle would far exceed $2,000 or far exceed $803, which is the current amount of money that we're allowed to have.
Well, in that is utilities and all of the things that go along with the home and vehicle maintenance, plus the stuff that goes wrong at the house that needs to be fixed. That can get spent pretty quick.
Well, in other words, having it is wonderful. Having it available is necessary and wonderful. But at the same time that you have it, they don't pay for the upkeep. The state, as a general rule, on all fronts that I've ever dealt with, government in general, if I can use a different analogy, they don't literally do this, but it's like somebody gives you a dog They give you the best dog there is in the world, okay? He's a great dog, fantastic dog. And they're very proud of what they did, and you're very proud to receive the dog. But what they don't do is they don't buy the food to feed the dog. So if they give you a Great Dane as a gift,
or the vet bills or anything else,
all of a sudden this dog has to have 3 bags of dog food a day, and they don't provide that.
All right, so the point is that on the surface, things may really look like a good and kind measure for us as a culture to take towards the disabled, but there is, in fact, another point of view. Let me move on here, Roger.
Right.
On the income issue, the basis of the problem seems to be that the Social Security Administration definition of disability under the Social Security is based on your inability to work. The problem is these ideas and laws on how this stuff will operate was put down 20 or 30 years ago. And we live in a very different world now. There was a time when work was in the form of manual labor. And of course, people in your condition are not able to do that. But now technology and education allows one to enter the workforce who has limited physical abilities. The problem is these individuals still need the physical and medical assistance offered by the Social Security Administration. And so that you still have to stay married to that one way or the other. Presently, the income cap is $803 per month. That negates the disabled person from seeking true, real employment. All the current minimum wage rates and disabled persons can work a total of 110 hours per month. So that means that you can work about 14 days per month, and that's it. Many people receiving Social Security are unable to enter into the workforce, but for those who can participate, they should not be held back by the current financial caps. The asset issue. It's good that Social Security Administration recipients are allowed to have a home and a vehicle. Unfortunately, the $2,000 limit on one's assets will not cover the upkeep and the taxes and the insurance, much less for both of these things, the home and the vehicle. Possible solutions?
Yeah, I would like some changes made in the Social Security, especially SSI, which is supplementary income. That's where the caps all come in. Any federal or state help, that's the initial criteria. If you're on SSI, that will get the doors open to a whole lot of things. But in order to be on SSI, you have to meet these financial limits or not exceed the financial limits that you just mentioned. One problem I would like to see addressed, if an individual has the ability to work and gain more income than $803 per month, which if you're able to work at all, you can. Minimum wage will only let you work 14 days a month. You're not going to go out very hard and try to do anything. I have actually, in my life or in my existence, turned down money-making project salaries, not just adventure, but salary jobs, because if I took the salary job, I would be kicked off the program I happen to be on, and if I'm kicked off the program, the money I make does not come anywhere close to the money I'm getting from the government. So you turn these down. What this does,
Roger, you would pay your fair share of income taxes, all the taxes that are applicable while doing that job. So the government would actually increase what they take in on you if they allowed you to work.
Well, they would get something out of me because if I was able to do that, because right now the way it's set up, and you're not really allowed to do you're not allowed to get any income from anything. Therefore, I am strictly a liability as far as the state's concerned. I appreciate their help. Don't get me wrong. I'm very thankful for it. I do not want it to end. But if I was able to work and earn an income, then I would pay income tax on that, and they would get some of their money back. Now, if the idea that, okay, when you pass a certain point, we're going to cut you off the program, but you can keep working, and the answer is no. If I don't have someone here to help me, then I can't get to the job. I can't do the job, and therefore I won't be working, and I lose it all.
It's about having, for so many hours a day, at certain times of the day, access to caregivers who come to your home.
Because even though I have money, even though I was able to make an income such that I would pay income tax, I still would not have the money to pay the people necessary to come do all the things that have to be done for me, and to even get me to work and back. I mean, I would have to, unless it was a homebound job, I would have to have someone get me and drive me to work, leave me there, and come pick me up when the day's over. So most of us have figured out real quick that there's no point in even trying to get employment because it costs more than it's going to be worth. My point is, if the government would consider the possibility of looking at this particular aspect and saying, okay, what difference does it make if the individual makes money and makes enough money to pay income tax, which would be quite a bit of money, we're getting our money back. The way it is now, it's just dead expense.
Roger, let me read this just a little bit here. Right. And I'm just going to read what is written here. Under the current system, capable people are not working because earning a minimal income can cost them everything. Now, that's what you've been describing. An acquaintance of mine, it says here, was placed in a nursing home paid for through Medicaid when her family was unable to care for her. She had a master's degree in counseling, which would allow her to give back to society as well as earn a decent wage. However, due to the income limitations, she was unable to work because she would have made enough money to exceed the cap, but not nearly enough to pay the care that she was receiving in the nursing home. As I think about her and others like her, I'm reminded of the American Negro College Fund slogan, "A mind is a terrible thing to waste." Roger, that sounds very close to your situation. Only you're not in a nursing home. You are staying in your own home. You are not in the lap of luxury, but you are comfortable in your home, and you are set up to where you can still accomplish things, like you wrote your book and other things. Why doesn't the government stop for just a moment and rethink the process that they slung people like you into 20 or 30 years ago, that no longer in any way, shape, or form fills the bill? And what it does, and I'm just going to go ahead and say this, and if you want me to edit this out later, I will, but what it does is to allow caregivers to literally, and there's no other word for this, extort you, in that they say, hey, I'm worth more than you're paying me, yet you're only paying them what the government can allow you to pay them. And they say, and because they have fallen so far behind in these home healthcare workers' wage and allowances on this sort of thing. And they say, look, man, I'm just going to go get another job. Now, the problem is, if they go get another job, you are not allowed the budget to hire a replacement. If they can work a dozen other places for several dollars more an hour than you are given to work all this out, when you lose your caregivers, you are automatically in big trouble. You are no longer going to be able to go to bed at night. You're no longer going to be able to get up in the morning. You are no longer going to be able to prepare your food. You can't even get to the bathroom without scheduling it carefully when a caregiver is available for you at certain times of the day. You have become a master at that, Roger, and I have complete respect for you because of the way you handle that. But now they're putting you in position where caregivers can say, well, I'll show up 3 hours late whenever I want to, because after all, we know you can't afford to hire anybody. Besides, you don't pay me enough anyway. Now that is very blunt, but that is exactly what is happening to you.
Yes, sir, it is, or it has, and it could happen to me. I hope that we never reach that point in our relationship with caregivers. But yes, it's very much a reality and a possibility. The idea is that there needs to be an increase in money available for us to be competitive with the non-government paid world. Even government itself pays more money, and then I'm able to get. Let me give you a quick example. I'm aware of an individual who started to work for the government in a government office with minimal training. I mean, it's not like it was a great job, but minimal training. And they started this individual out at $12 an hour, which is the top that I'm able to pay the best, finest, longest servitude caregiver I've got. They started this individual, the government started this individual out at that rate. So when you're actually competing against the government in funds, and they can, other offices, other entities in government can pay what would be considered basically minimum wage type jobs, and they're paying to begin with what I pay at the end. It makes getting caregivers very challenging.
You are getting pushed into an impossible situation, Roger. And we kid around a lot on this because you're a great guy and you've got a super sense of humor and you've lived a remarkable life, but you got a few more chapters in you yet to be written. And doggone it, Roger, this is a hard thing to bring up and talk about on a podcast. And it seems like when we get started, there's never enough time, but it is a very serious situation. And to add to that at this point right now, it's hard to even get people in a government position to return your calls now. Everybody's crazy about the COVID thing, and we don't want to take anything from that. But this is a serious situation that now grows more serious, I would say, monthly. And the reason why I know that is because of I get a chance to talk to you, Roger. And that's the thing, folks. It's not just Roger. Roger has outlived his family. Roger does not have a lot of the things that government likes to presuppose is already in place. And Roger has allowed himself out of necessity because of government instruction for the last few years to allow himself to be without income other than what the government chooses for him to have concerning his healthcare workers and so on and so forth. It's a tough situation, and it is getting tougher, and it deserves attention. The people in Austin are the people above that nationally, because there are families and individuals like Roger all over the United States, and that is his message. Forgive me, Roger, for taking off and going up that trail, but doggone it, it just needs to be said.
Well, I think you've summarized it well, and I appreciate your thoughts, because I think if people will listen and pay attention, we're not asking for a tremendous overhaul of government, and certainly not a matter of not being appreciative of what government is currently providing. Government needs to look at what they're providing and realize that things go up in price. Salaries go up in price. It's harder to find competent people on a regular basis when you can only offer a small, barely above minimum wage salary to begin with. People are just not interested in that when they can go other places and do the same kind of work for more money. It's not like private enterprise. Private enterprise says when you make more money in your business, you can afford to pay your employees more, which is certainly true. In government, they give you a certain amount of money and say you've got to make this work for everybody there, and you can't just give arbitrary raises because you feel like it.
We're out of time. We got to go for this edition of Roger Dykes Just Saying. But as always, sir, you are a complete gentleman at the end of the day on all of these podcasts, and we appreciate so much, though, you sharing your point of view, because all of this is real and it is happening. So bless you, little brother, and we'll just have to do this again in 3 weeks.
Well, I thank you for coming by my call. I appreciate the listeners listening, and hopefully they will have gained some insight into an area they have not been exposed to before.
Oh, and there's one more thing, Roger. You need to keep working on that love life deal.
I know. Yeah. I keep trying, but they're going to have to give me more than $2,000 to get anybody's attention.
Thanks for the plug.
Well, you're very kind to plug my show on your podcast, so I appreciate that.
But you can't do anything but just keep painting the picture and showing them. You know, one thing that we're not saying is you need to call your, what, do they start with like a state representative? Maybe.
Well, I don't know. See, that's what keeps me in the box, because I don't know who for them to call. Because, you know, now on the federal level, of course, if we build that side up of working Social Security, reworking it, wording it, and so on and so forth. That, you know, everybody could benefit from that. But as far as the state goes, most of the senators that I've talked to and represented don't even know what I'm talking about. And so it doesn't do any good to say, write your congressman, because the congressman's going to go, I don't know anything about it.
You're a best kept secret.
Yeah, well, the reason being that I cannot come up with who's got control. The Department of Health in Texas has a control factor over this class program, but nobody will tell me where it is.
You've been listening to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. If you'd like to get a message to Roger, his Facebook account is listed as Roger Dykes. Become a friend, or you can send your questions and comments to rogerdykes51@gmail.com. That's ROGERDYKES51@gmail.com. Our podcast reveals a new episode every 3 weeks. Rollout is on Wednesday evening, shortly after dark, Texas time. Join us next time for our next episode of Roger Dykes Just Sayin. I'm Michael Shawn. On behalf of Roger Dykes, thanks for listening.